For me, life was going really well. When I was 28, creating applications was more than just a job. It was my passion. I've never really needed someone to hold my hand through the highs and lows of life, since I've always been the independent sort. Even though they lived in a different city and were kilometers away, my parents were always reachable via phone. However, I haven't asked them for anything more than their love and guidance in years. A short distance from the bustle of the design office, where I threw my imagination into work that seemed more like play, was my comfortable flat, which was my castle. Laud parties and the club scene weren't my thing. Exploring the genius of the greats in my industry or delving into the newest design trends would be my ideal evening. I did, however, like being outside. My haven was the peaceful seclusion of the park close to my house. I'd been on that path 100 times before, and that's when this whole roller coaster began. I can still clearly recall the day. The park was bathed in a soft glow from the perfectly balanced sun. When I went into the bike path without looking, I was probably thinking about some project while wearing headphones. Suddenly, this man on a bicycle screamed to a stop directly in front of me. "Watch where you're going," he said, his voice a mixture of relief and irritation. I pulled out my headphones in surprise. "Oh, I'm so sorry, shoot." I didn't look. A grin was beginning to appear on his face, but he was panting and gathering his breath. "You're obviously okay, didn't intend to frighten you." "Yes, I am all right, if a little rattled. And you?" "I'll survive. It is possible to swap out bikes." "People not so much," he remarked, now resting comfortably on his bike. I got to know Alex that way. He worked at a vehicle sales firm, was a typical city person, and had a lot to say. His smile could brighten even the darkest spaces, and he had a gruff appeal. We ended up talking right there in the middle of the path, despite our rough beginning. With a constant grin, he asked, "So, you always jump in front of bikes for fun? Or is today a special occasion?" "Well, I suppose this is the first time for everything." Normally, I'm more conscious of my surroundings. I fired back, attempting to hide my embarrassment. "Alex," he remarked while holding out his hand. I gave it a shake. "Alex, nice to meet you. My name is Lena. And I'm going to assume that you're an artistic person. You have a creative energy." I chuckled. "A feeling of creativity? Is it really that clear?" "Yes, I work as a designer, primarily applications." He shouted, knew it, as though he had won something. "I sell cars for a living. Although it's not as glamorous, it covers the expenses." We continued our conversation, sharing tidbits of our life. It seemed as though we had known one another for years, rather than minutes, since the talk flowed so naturally. After exchanging numbers and saying our last goodbyes, I left with an odd sensation in my stomach, perhaps exhilaration. I wasn't certain. Alex and I began seeing one another more frequently after that day at the park. What began as informal coffee dates after work quickly evolved into late-night meals, and then full weekends spent together. Even though everything happened so quickly, it seemed like the most logical development ever. One evening, Alex was already preparing supper when I got home from a particularly demanding day at the studio. The tiny apartment smelled of something nice, and for a second I was surprised at how proper and homey everything felt. I remarked, hey, you're home early," as I put my keys down on the table and made my way directly to the kitchen. "What's all this?" Alex said, "Just thought I'd surprise you with dinner," without looking back. "You've been working so hard lately, figured you could use a break." I put my head on his back and put my arms around him from behind. "You're amazing, you know that." He turned to me and made a fox bow as he laughed. "My girl deserves nothing less. Go change now. Dinner is almost ready." The conversation took a surprise turn that evening when we sat down to eat the unexpectedly great supper that Alex had prepared. Alex said, "So, I've been thinking," in a tone that was more solemn than normal. "About?" I asked, feeling uneasy. "Us." He gestured around the flat and remarked, "This, everything we've got going on. I think it's time we took the next step." A beat skipped in my chest. Next step? Yes, this time we're actually relocating together. No more hopping from apartment to apartment. I pondered that for a while without saying anything. Although it was a significant step, wasn't this what I had hoped for? "Are you sure?" At last I inquired. "It's a big commitment." With a steady stare, Alex grasped my hand across the table. Never in my life have I been more certain of anything. I genuinely want to make this work because I adore you. Any reservations I might have had were dispelled by the earnestness in his speech. "Okay," I grinned and replied. "Let's do it." We suddenly started a new chapter in our relationship. It was surprisingly simple to find a new home, and before we knew it, we were signing a lease for a larger, more spacious apartment in an area that was unfamiliar to us both. Decorating and personalizing our common area was a fascinating experience. However, the honeymoon period couldn't endure forever because the new flat brought with it new realities. A few months after we had moved in together, the first significant test of our relationship culminated one evening. "Can we talk, Lena?" Alex sat down on the couch next me and spoke in a serious tone. I turned to him and silenced the TV. "What's up?" "It's about us, our future," he said, pausing briefly before going on. "I have been reflecting a lot about my ideal existence for us. I believe it's time we have a conversation about you taking a break from work to concentrate on us and our house." I felt a surge of frustration. Step back from work? "Alex, you know how much my career means to me." "I do. I really do. But can't you see, we could have so much more if we focused on building a life together, the traditional way." The traditional way. The words hung in the air between us, a stark reminder of our differing views on what our future should look like. "Alex, I love you, but I can't just give up on my dreams, my career. That's not the life I want," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I just thought you'd want the same things I do." It was the first of many conversations, each one a little harder than the last. We were in love, yes, but love wasn't always enough to bridge the gap between two very different visions for the future. One evening, as I was finishing up a project on my laptop, Alex came home looking like he had something on his mind. He dropped his keys on the table with a clatter that seemed louder in the quiet of our place. "So, babe, we need to talk," he began, his tone more serious than I'd heard in a while. I closed my laptop, sensing this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. "What's up?" "It's about us, about how we're living. I've been thinking maybe it's time we start thinking about the future, about kids, Alex said, avoiding my eyes. "Kids. Alex, you know my job is super important to me right now. We've talked about this. Why bring it up again, out of nowhere?" I replied, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "Because things change. People change. Isn't it normal to want a family, to want my wife to be more present at home?" His words felt like a slap. "So, what, you want me to just drop everything, my career, just so I can fit into your idea of a normal family?" I shot back, the hurt clear in my voice. "It's not like that. It's just, that's how families work. The wife takes care of the home and the husband provides. It's normal," Alex said, his voice rising slightly. "Normal for who, Alex? Because it sure doesn't sound like the life I want." We're supposed to be a team, remember? But it wasn't just Alex. His mom, Mrs. Peterson, living just too conveniently close, turned our home into her personal project. Her visits became more frequent, each one leaving me feeling smaller and more incompetent in my own home. One afternoon, she came over unannounced, as had become her habit. I was in the middle of work, and the sight of her made my stomach twist. "Hello, dear. I just thought I'd drop by, to see how you're managing," she said, her voice dripping with condescension I hadn't grown used to. "Managing just fine, thanks. I'm actually quite busy with work right now," I replied, trying to keep my tone polite. "Oh, I see. Still glued to that screen. I see. And what about Alex? Shouldn't you be taking care of him, making sure he has a nice home to come back to?" She began her inspection, finger-testing surfaces for dust, sighing under her breath. "Alex is a grown man. He can take care of himself, and this home is just fine," I retorted, my patience wearing thin. "It's just, when I was your age, I made sure my husband and home were my top priority. Maybe if you spent less time on that computer and more time in the kitchen, things would be different," she suggested, not so subtly. I clenched my jaw, biting back the harsh words itching to spill out. "Thanks for the advice, but I think we're managing just fine." She huffed, clearly unimpressed with my response, and continued her critique tour of my home. After what felt like an eternity, she left, leaving a heavy silence in her wake. Alex's and his mother's pressure didn't let up. It was as if they teamed up, launching a well-coordinated assault on my independence and career. I remember I felt like surrendering the day I made the decision to pretend to quit my job. It felt like surrendering, but with a plan in mind. Sitting across from Alex at our small dining table, I braced myself for the conversation. The air was thick with tension, a silent witness to the countless arguments that had preceded this moment. "Alex, we need to talk about this whole job thing," I started, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up, his expression a mix of surprise and curiosity. "Oh, what about it?" "I've been thinking a lot about what you and your mom have been saying about family and priorities," I said, each word measured, careful not to betray my true feelings. "And," he prompted, leaning in slightly, "I've decided to quit my job to focus on us, on our home." I lied. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. For a moment, Alex just stared at me. Then his face broke into a relieved smile. "Really, babe? That's great. I knew you'd come around. This is going to be so good for us." "Yeah, great," I echoed, a hollow feeling settling in my chest. The plan was simple. I had talked to my boss earlier that week, explaining the situation. He was understanding and offered me the chance to work remotely, a lifeline I clung to like a buoy in stormy seas. So every morning, after Alex left for work, I'd open my laptop and dive into my designs. The creative work was a balm to my troubled mind. The savings account I opened was a silent testament to my rebellion, a secret fund that grew with every project I completed. It felt like leading a double life, one where I played the dutiful wife in Alex's presence and a successful designer in his absence. One day, while I was deep in work, a knock on the door jolted me back to reality. It was Alex, home early. Panicking, I slammed my laptop shut and shoved it under the couch just as he walked in. "Hey, what's up? Why are you home so early?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Meeting got canceled. What's up with you?" "You look guilty as sin," he joked, but his eyes narrowed slightly, noticing my flustered state. "Just surprised to see you is all," I replied, forcing a laugh. He shrugged it off thankfully, and the moment passed, but it was a close call. Too close. That night, as we lay in bed, Alex turned to me, a serious look on his face. I've been thinking. Since you're home all day now, maybe we could start thinking about, kids. The topic came up again, and it felt like no matter how much I did, how much I pretended, it would never be enough. Kids. Alex, we've talked about this. I'm not sure now is the right time, but it's perfect timing. You're at home, we're stable, what's holding us back? He interrupted, his tone a mix of frustration and eagerness. Everything, I wanted to shout. My job, my independence, our entire relationship, hanging by a thread. But I swallowed those words, replacing them with a non-committal. We'll see, Alex. Let's just take it one step at a time. 3 months into our experiment of living off Alex's salary alone, the cracks were showing wide and alarming. Our finances were a mess, stretched thinner than I thought possible. I hadn't touched the savings I'd secretly stashed away yet, clinging to the hope that Alex would see reason. But when we sat down to discuss our financial predicament, it blew up in my face. Alex, we can't keep going like this. We're barely making ends meet. I think it's time I went back to work, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He slammed his coffee cup down, his face clouding over. Back to this again. I told you we're fine. You just need to cut back on spending. Cut back? I was already stretching every penny till it screamed. Cut back on what, Alex? We're already down to the basics. I haven't bought anything for myself in months. That's not the point. You need to learn to manage better. My mom raised a family on less. He shot back, his words like daggers. I was fuming. His inability to see the reality of our situation was baffling. Before I could argue further, the conversation was cut short by his phone ringing. He picked up, listened for a moment, then hung up with a sigh. Mom's coming over tomorrow. She thinks she can give us some tips on budgeting, he said, as if that solved everything. Great, a lecture on thriftiness from the woman who still does her son's laundry. Just what I needed. The next day, his mom, Mrs. Peterson, arrived with all the subtlety of a bulldozer. Without so much as a hello, she launched into her sermon on saving and scrimping, her voice grating in my ears. Dear, when Alex was a boy, we didn't have much, but we made do. Maybe you need to reconsider your priorities, she began, her tone patronizing. I bristled. I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Peterson, but I assure you I'm very careful with our expenses. She waved a hand dismissively. It's all about sacrifices. Maybe less dining out, more home cooking. Every little bit helps. Dining out. We haven't seen the inside of a restaurant in months. Her assumptions were baseless and insulting. I'm quite capable of running our household without resorting to extreme measures. Perhaps what we actually need is additional income, I countered, my patience wearing thin. Mrs. Peterson shook her head, a smirk playing on her lips. My son works hard enough. It's not about earning more, it's about spending less. You'll see. With a few adjustments, you'll manage just fine. The adjustments she suggested were ludicrous. Clip coupons, she said, as if I hadn't already scarred every circular and app for discounts. Cook in bulk, as if our freezer wasn't already stocked with meals stretched to their limits. After she left, I was seething. Not only had Alex dismissed my concerns, but now I was being schooled on frugality by a woman who still thought a gallon of milk cost $1. After the whole budget lecture fiasco from Mrs. Peterson, I was at my wit's end. I needed some real advice, someone who'd understand without judging. So I called the one person I knew would give it to me straight, my mom. I barely got 2 sentences out when Alex barged into the room, his face twisted in anger. He must have heard me talking about going back to work. Who are you complaining to now? He snapped, yanking the phone from my hand so hard I nearly lost my balance. I was shocked. Give me back my phone, Alex. I'm talking to my mom. A wife airing dirty laundry. What next? You going to tell her I'm a lousy husband? His words were sharp, cutting deep. We're discussing our options, not you. And since when is talking to my mom a crime? I shot back, my anger rising. The argument spiraled out of control, words flying like bullets. Before I knew it, Alex stormed out, slamming the door behind him so hard the wall shook. He disappeared for hours, leaving me to stew in a mix of worry and fury. He came back late, reeking of booze and bitterness. The look in his eyes was something I hadn't seen before. You think you're better than me, huh? Making more money, showing me up. He slurred, his words sloppy but venomous. That's not it, and you know it. We're struggling, Alex. I thought if I could work, we'd have a bit more breathing room. I tried to explain, keeping my voice even. He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. Oh, so it's my fault now? I'm not good enough. Well, listen here. If you don't like how things are, you can just leave. I stared at him, disbelief and anger warring inside me. It's 3:00 a.m., Alex. You're drunk, and you're not making any sense. I said leave, he shouted, stumbling toward me. I had no choice. I grabbed the essentials, my phone and wallet. When I reached for my purse, he snatched it away. Where do you think you're going with that? That's my money in there. His words were like a slap. I had contributed to that money, saved from my secret work, but arguing felt pointless. I called a taxi and left. The cold night air sobered me. Checking into a nearby hotel, I realized this was a turning point. There was no going back from here. The marriage I thought I had, the life I was trying to build with Alex, had crumbled away. But I had my strength, my skills, and a little bit of savings to start anew. It was a cold comfort, but it was something. Walking into the lawyer's office the next day, I felt a mix of anxiety and resolve. The weight of my decision pressed down on me, but the need for freedom propelled me forward. The lawyer, a stern-faced man with a surprisingly gentle voice, listened intently as I laid out my situation. He didn't waste any time, pulling out document after document, explaining each step with patience. You're making a brave choice, he said, handing me a pen. Sign here, here, and here. We'll take care of the rest. I signed each paper with a steady hand, my heart racing. It was official now. I was filing for divorce. Returning to the apartment felt surreal. Alex was still passed out on the couch, oblivious to the world crumbling around him. I moved quietly, efficiently packing my life into boxes and suitcases. Each item I picked up felt like shedding a layer of the past. As I zipped up the last suitcase, Alex groaned, his eyes blinking open. Hey, where's my beer? He mumbled, his voice rough. I couldn't help but marvel at the absurdity of the moment. Beer? That's the last thing you need to worry about, Alex. He sat up, squinting at the bags. What's this? You leaving? Something like that, I replied, holding out the divorce papers. Consider this my final goodbye. He took the papers, a smirk spreading across his face as he scanned them. This is a joke, right? You'll come back apologizing, and I might just take you back if you promise to behave. The laugh that escaped me was bitter, laced with freedom. Apologize for what? For finally standing up for myself? No, Alex. This is it. I'm done. He tossed the papers aside, the smirk fading. You think you can just walk out? You can't be back. I shook my head, a sense of peace settling over me. I won't, and you'll see that I'm better off without you. I then picked up my belongings and made my final exit from the property. The new location was modest and unpretentious, but it was mine. Situated in close proximity to my previous workplace, it offered me a new beginning and the opportunity to reconstruct my life according to my own wishes. I made the decision to get in touch with my former employer in the hopes that there could be an opportunity to return to work full-time. I felt as though a burden had been lifted as I picked up the phone. "Hi, this is me. Would it be possible for us to discuss returning to work?" Trying to speak steadily, I asked. Then there was a pause, obviously. "Your brilliance has been missed here. When are you able to begin?" "Really? That's fantastic. I can get started right now. Thank you very much." I could hear the delight in my voice. Going back to work was like going home. It was thrilling to return to the rhythm of design and creation, and my coworkers embraced me with open arms. I was doing what I loved and at a place where I belonged, surrounded by people who appreciated and respected me. One day, following a particularly good project presentation, I heard an unfamiliar number beep on my phone. I replied with curiosity. "Hello. It's me, Alex Lena. I've heard that you're doing great." "That's excellent," he said, his voice a reminder of the past, but I felt cut off from the anguish and rage. "Thank you. Alex, what do you want?" "Hi, I was laid off. It's difficult. I was wondering if you could assist me and if we could try again." It was astounding how bold his proposal was. He still believed that he could rely on me and use me as a safety net in spite of everything. "I'm done with that phase of my life, Alex. Instead of going back, I'm going ahead. You ought to follow suit." On the other end, there was a sigh of resignation followed by silence. "Yes, I suppose you're correct. Be careful." After I hung up, I had a sudden feeling of strength. I was ready to write new chapters according to my own terms now that I had flipped the page. Now my life was about finding my true self again, away from the shadow of a broken marriage. It was about taking back my self-reliance, my sense of self, and my joy. With a renewed feeling of self-worth and clarity about what I deserved, I began to take up new interests, get back in touch with old acquaintances, and even consider dating again.